Thank you. I'm referring to the last video where I began the discussion on Christos Yannaras, a contemporary philosopher, a contemporary in Greece. I believe he's a professor at the School of Athens. But all that to say, the comment on this video was very insightful, as I said in the description to this video. Pardon all the mess over there. I have to go for a drive for work, and what's the word? Packed my bags. But at any rate, that's not what this video is about. In brief, I will verbally recapitulate the comment and then respond to it, and then begin those 3 paragraphs that were hinted at or teased in the prior video. So the comment was about whether or not the linguistic was sacrificed on the altar of going beyond. So there's a famous saying by Captain Ahab in the novel Moby Dick, where one of his crew members asks him, "Why are you so obsessed? Why can't we go home? Why must we stay out here in the ocean, surrounded by waves that don't like us, below a cloudy sky that wants to strike us with thunderbolts and lightning? And if we're not having our ears split, our tongues are parched like a desert. How do you find yourself driven to remain out here in this waste? What are you looking for, Captain Ahab?" And his response was, "I will find that whale, that white whale, which took a piece of me. Because I must," and then he went all metaphysical, as only, who wrote Moby Dick? As only Herman Melville can. He said metaphysically, "I will strike and pierce the mask." That's the goal. Strike through the mask. Don't strike at. Revolutionaries, writers of declarations of independence, they all content themselves with striking the mask, discovering a fact, pragmatically opening the door or closing it. I'm paraphrasing now, to try to situate such a metaphysical statement in a local, national context, versus striking through the mask, through the historical particularities, to some negative way. And this will strike a note with someone who's acquainted with scholastic metaphysics, because one of the methodologies for approaching being with a capital B is to say what it is not, to go down the road, the via, negative, go down the negative route, say what it is not, affirm the opposite of existence in order to, in a strange way, protect existence. Now, this sounds well and good, although it's expressed in an aggressive manner with Herman Melville's Captain Ahab. None of that, I think, is sacrificed linguistically in Christos Yannaras' approach to being with a capital B. And I hope that comes out, namely his respect for the affordances of language, but also, and this is not the other side of the coin, but this is the edge of the coin, what language's limits offer us by way of curbing our exploration. And then we might ask what value such curbing has in store for someone who respectfully will appropriate language, explore language, and study it so carefully that they really come to the point which they have been beside in their learning of language at one level, but then of learning history of the words on the other, and then learning on the third level the discourse, the way different people who have learned the history of the words, have learned the words, are using the words to try and come to not an argumentative point, not a conclusion to a story, but to the exhaustion of meaning. To say as much and no more than what can be said, and then to stop. Trusting that that stopping does not end existence. This is why the other half of this video is called the linguistic turn. In the 20th century, especially in Anglophone-speaking America and other parts, the turn for professional philosophers was to analyze not the external world, not psychological states, not beliefs, desires, not artifacts or art pieces, not aesthetics or morals or history even, but to, as it were, pretend to lift the hood of the vehicle and try to remove and put back in the transmission to our language. And so to speak, content themselves with how content is distributed in grammar. And what this allows for is a mirroring of the history of reflection on morals, psychology, beliefs, desires, history at a small scale, namely how in studying the mechanism of our grammars, we discover all the same problems of paradox, of irony, of doubling, of substitution, of elision or absence. And if we can see these at a smaller scale, well, then the assumption is surely we're seeing it at a more precise scale. And if we're gauging these quote unquote metaphysical problems at a smaller scale, then we might be able actually to solve them at such a controlled scale, as if you could put all the problems of philosophy into a beaker and call that beaker the logic of a grammar. And if you can just solve the problem of paradox, the problem of irony, the problem of substitution, the problem of doubling, the problem of absence, the problem of reference, if you can solve that in the tiny little beaker of a grammar and devise rules that explain how those things can be situated and resolved, then, well, the rest is commentary. The rest is an inductive leap into cities and families and I suppose even astronomy. But I don't know how that inductive leap is going and where they've landed. But I don't think, on the one hand, we should discount language, sacrificing it, or on the other, to puff it up with the false leaven of an ideal security. No, I think what Christos Yannaras does is he places it in the middle. He places it as an important treasure, an important, not springboard, but an important vehicle for transmitting discovery and desire, but with the implied responsibility of not making it something that it is not going beyond the vehicle unless you're willing to go on your own 2 feet, as it were, which is fine. It's an individual enterprise, but you won't be able to have your cake and eat it too. You won't be able to say language is useless and then think that that pronouncement should be taken seriously by anyone. So now, in that admittedly verbose way of going about saying language is important, let's look at those 3 paragraphs of Christos Yannaras and let him speak for himself. Something I don't want to do here is be biased. But then again, I ask myself, what is bias? What do I mean by bias? What I mean is I'm trying not only to speak to the limit of language, but I'm trying to speak to the limit of my experience. I don't want to go beyond my experience. Or if I do, I want to admit that I'm speculating. But if I am not speculating, then it's hard for me to believe that by merely recounting my experience, I am being biased. Well, of course I'm being biased when I recount my experience, but how is that avoidable? How is that a negative in the accounting of interpersonal dialogue? Ancillary questions. So here's the first paragraph from Christos Yannaras. In this book, I have attempted to set out in a contemporary manner, using a rational method and order, a personal response to the ontological question, as I have understood it in the Greek philosophical literature of the early Christian and medieval periods. We're already at 12 minutes, so I'm going to stop with that paragraph, but I'm going to say what I was thinking about this last night, this paragraph. Something with philosophy. It's tempting to think, okay, I know those words. I'm going to move on to the next paragraph, and then I'm going to find a book with someone who has counterexamples to this philosopher. And that's fine. It's good to have a wide breadth. It's good to go across the ocean in the boat. But sooner or later, we need to, if we can't drop an anchor because it's too deep in the middle of the ocean, we have to be willing to stop and let the wind move our sails slower than the publishing industry might move us to buy the next book. And I'm willing to do that here with Christos Yannaras, because I think what he's saying, or at least what his translator is saying through the translation of the Greek, is something so profound that it requires training to see how he's arriving at the edge of language. And I'm willing to go there. So this paragraph, while it might seem to be kind of a clearing of the throat, I think it holds an implied question. And that is this. When he says in the first sentence, in this book, I have attempted to set out in a contemporary manner, in parentheses, using a rational method and order, a personal response to the ontological question. Notice he says using a rational method and order. And he's saying that in reference to a contemporary manner as a personal response to the ontological question. So already here, I would say there is implied that there are many ways, not just one, of responding to the ontological question. Now, the word ontological is a Greek word, and it's a compound. It has 2 parts to it, onto and logical. We all know what logical is, right? From logos. But the ontos, is being, or what is. So the logic of what is. So the question of, the logic of what is the question of just that. Now, the question beside that point is, what's the best way to approach responding to the question, what is there in existence? What is a way to go after the answer to the ontological question Is it one way or is it many? And if there are many ways, what's the best way for me, coming back now to personal experience? I think you could write a book, a work of fiction as a manner of approaching the ontological question. I think you could be a mathematician. I think you could be someone walking to the coffee shop and thereby be approaching the ontological question. I think it's a question of carefulness, awareness, intention, all those things that we can't see with the naked eye, but which are movements of the soul, are part and parcel of our subjective experience of the world, not just the kinds of experiences of the world that can be caught by a surveillance camera, or the kinds of experiences that can be caught by a report that someone might give or write down in their language. Facets of the subjective experience can be captured by language, can be captured by surveillance cameras, can be captured by memory, but are they exhausted thereby? Is the totality of subjective awareness encapsulated in these vehicles, in these technologies, in these manners of approach? Well, I think Christos Yannaras would be implying in this first paragraph that they would not, even collectively, even exhaustively putting them one beside the other and dropping them like dominoes, would not necessarily bring you to the shoulder of the ontological question. And so we want to, in this first paragraph, and I think Christos Yannaras is allowing us to do this, get a lay of the land. What he's doing with this book is not everything. I have attempted to set out in a contemporary manner a personal response to the ontological question as I have understood it in the Greek philosophical literature of the early Christian and medieval periods. Now, you could say, instead of the Greek philosophical literature, any ethnic philosophical literature. But this stems from his personal experience. And I think that's a transparent way of going about a philosophical program. And it's one of the reasons why on this channel I started with Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard has been my foot at the door, keeping it ajar to allow me to begin to try to open with my shoulder or elbow it into a wider world. And that's all for this video. We'll go to the second paragraph in the next one. Thank you. Thank you.